Hey guys, tonight we ease into a journey through time, drifting down stone-paved streets where the glow of oil lamps throws shaky light across weathered walls. You are in ancient Rome, and the air is thick with the mingled smells of baking bread, fried fish, and whatever questionable stew someone left simmering since yesterday. The chatter of voices rises and falls, sandals slap against the cobblestones, and somewhere close, the clatter of dice on a wooden board punctuates the evening like a heartbeat. You probably won't survive this. After all, 2,000 years of germs, grime, and questionable food hygiene stand between you and a happy digestive system. But don't worry. For tonight, you're only strolling with your imagination, wrapped in a blanket instead of a toga.so, before you get comfortable. Take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And hey, drop a comment with your location and the local time. I love knowing who else is wandering these sleepy roads with us tonight. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey. Together, you find yourself trudging the avenues of Rome, the kind that weave and wind through neighborhoods alive at every hour. The stones beneath your sandals are uneven, worn smooth by years of carts and feet. Each groove carries the ghosts of countless journeys. Merchants hauling sacks of grain, senators wrapped in fine wool cloaks, or children darting through shadows. With sticky fingers from honey cakes, the city hums around you, alive with the sort of noise you can almost sink into like a lullaby. The streets are narrow, sometimes so tight that you could stretch your arms and nearly brush both sides of the buildings. Balconies lean overhead, dripping with laundry and plants that catch what little breeze stirs the heavy air. You duck instinctively as a clay pot empties its contents. Hopefully water, though let's be honest, probably not. Onto the street. Below, ancient Rome didn't really specialize in sanitary city planning. You wrinkle your nose and keep moving, trying not to imagine how your sandals are absorbing the day's collective leftovers. Everywhere you look, the city pulses with people. A baker balances a tray of flatbreads on his shoulder. A pair of women haggle loudly over figs. Soldiers on leave laugh too loudly as they jostle each other, wine on their breath. And tucked between these everyday sights, you spot the real heart of Rome's quick cuisine. Food stalls glowing in the lamplight, open to the street, their marble counters gleaming faintly as hands reach across to pass coins, bread, or ladles. Of steaming stew. One mainstream historical fact to note: these stalls weren't rare side attractions. Archaeologists estimate that in cities like Pompeii, smaller than Rome itself, nearly half the population depended on such places for daily meals. Few households had the space or equipment for a kitchen. Instead, most families cooked little or nothing at home, relying on stalls to feed them. Imagine that. No fridge, no pantry, just the sound of a neighbor's pot and the clink of your coin purse. You step closer to one stall, watching as the cook, hair tied back in a greasy strip of cloth, stirs a bubbling pot set into the counter. The surface glistens with oil, and the smell of garum, Rome's infamous fermented fish sauce, wafts out like a dare. A customer leans in, pinching his nose with one hand while happily shoving bread into the stew with the other. You realize that for many Romans, this wasn't just food. It was survival in edible form. That a quirky tidbit drifts into your mind, one that makes you smile in spite of yourself. Some stalls were so lively that they included painted murals of mythological scenes. Half advertisement, half decoration. Imagine grabbing a quick bowl of lentils beneath a fresco of Hercules flexing dramatically, as if to remind you that yes, you too might gain strength from chickpea stew, though more likely, you'd just end up with heartburn. As you walk deeper into the night, you notice how the streets seem to blur sound and smell into a constant lull. Somewhere, a street musician plucks a lyre, notes trembling in the warm air. Children's laughter fades behind you, replaced by the sharp call of a fruit seller advertising figs so sweet they'll make you forget your debts, though the creditors lurking nearby certainly won't. Rome, in its messy way, never lets you forget the balance of pleasure and pressure. Historians still argue whether these stalls were genuinely communal spaces or if they carried a stigma, a kind of culinary underclass for those too poor to cook at home. Some sources suggest elites avoided them, while others hint that even the wealthiest couldn't resist the smell of spiced sausages on a chilly evening. You lean against a wall, considering that debate, watching a man in a toga clearly cut above the crowd sneak a piece of fried fish from the cook. He pays quickly, glancing left and right, then disappears into the shadows as if he'd committed some scandalous act. You push on, weaving through the throng, your senses lulled by repetition. Bread baking, oil sizzling, coins clinking, voices overlapping. It feels like an orchestra with no conductor, yet somehow the music makes sense. This city is alive in a way that thrums under your skin, and though it overwhelms, it also comforts. It's steady, reliable, and deeply human. Just as you might find a late-night burger joint humming with tired laughter in your own neighborhood, Rome's avenues offered their own sleepy reassurance. Food waiting for you, no matter the hour. And as you wander past one more counter, the cook lifting a ladle of lentil stew toward a tired laborer, you realize this scene, ancient as it is, still feels familiar. The details change, but the craving for something warm, cheap, and immediate hasn't shifted much in 2,000 years. You tuck that thought away, letting it sit beside the hum of the city as your footsteps echo into the night. The next morning in Rome rises not with the quiet of birdsong or the soft spread of dawn's glow, but with the roar of commerce. You rub your eyes against the first hints of sunlight filtering between tall tenements and hear the chorus begin. Vendors shout their wares, fresh bread, hot loaves, their voices bouncing down alleys like competing alarm clocks. Bakers fling open shutters, releasing warm drafts of wheat and ash into the street. You step outside into that bustle, your senses pulled immediately toward the rhythm of a city waking up hungry. The cobblestones beneath your feet are still damp from last night's cleaning, or, more likely, last night's storm of chamber pots, and every sound seems to echo. You notice men hauling baskets heavy with vegetables, women with clay jugs of oil wobbling on their hips, and slaves running errands so quickly their sandals slap like drumbeats. Everyone is already in motion, and everyone, at some point, will need to stop for a bite, a mainstream fact to ground you. The Roman workday often began early, around sunrise, especially for laborers and craftsmen. Breakfast was typically simple, maybe just bread dipped in wine or sprinkled with cheese, but for many the first substantial meal didn't arrive until midday. Still, the streets at dawn were alive with quick bites and drinks, fuel before hours of toil. You trail a stonemason carrying a pick over his shoulder, and when he ducks into a corner stall, you can smell the toasted grains and roasted nuts. He purchases in a rough paper cone. The deeper you push into the crowd, the more you realize that morning in Rome isn't serene. It's chaotic, messy, and undeniably human. Chickens squawk, donkeys bray, cartwheels grind against stone. Somewhere, close, a baker is already out of patience, shouting at a customer who dares to haggle over a loaf. You smirk at the thought. If you've ever argued with a barista before your first coffee, you'd fit right in here. And here comes a quirky tidbit. Some Roman bakers carved their names into loaves of bread before baking, using wooden stamps, so they could claim credit, or perhaps avoid blame, for the finished product. Picture that. You're biting into a hot loaf, and on the crust is the ancient equivalent of a brand logo. Talk about influencer marketing, first-century style. You continue past a group of women with baskets of onions and garlic, the sharp smells rising like invisible daggers through the air. Behind them, a slave steadies a tray of steaming chickpea cakes, the Roman version of a protein bar. A few hungry children chase him, hoping he might spill a piece, and when he doesn't, they pout dramatically enough to earn a laugh from onlookers. The city feels crowded, yet there's something soothing about the pattern of it all, the routine of lives starting, of shops opening, of voices layering into a soundtrack you can almost predict. Even the pigeons on the rooftops seem to join in, cooing in time with the rattle of pots and the slam of shutters. You pause by one stall where a man is carefully slicing strips of dried fruit. He arranges them with exaggerated flair, then offers samples to passersby. A child takes a fig, chews happily, and the father tosses a coin onto the counter without breaking stride. That rhythm, grab, bite, pay, move, is the pulse of Rome's fast food. And it isn't glamorous, but it's efficient, Historians still argue whether Romans truly thought of these meals as fast or simply as normal. After all, most lower-class families didn't have a full kitchen at home. To them, grabbing lentil soup or bread at a stall wasn't indulgence. It was survival. Yet wealthier Romans sometimes sneered at the practice, calling it cheap or even morally questionable. You can almost hear the judgment in the background, whispered in clipped Latin. Still, as the crowd presses around you, it's clear people cared less about status than about quieting the growl in their stomachs. The sun climbs higher, the voice is louder, the air warmer. And yet you find yourself lulled rather than agitated. Every stall you pass, each with its jars of olives, platters of cheese, or steaming pots of porridge, adds another layer to your picture of daily Roman life. The details blur into routine, comforting in their repetition as you trail along. A thought flickers. This scene could be any city at morning rush hour. Replace sandals with sneakers, figs with bagels, honey cakes with donuts, and the pattern holds. The vendors may be different, the smells may shift, but the craving, the simple, unshakable need to start the day with something in your stomach, ties you across 2 millennia. And so you wander, still half dreaming, through the dawn of ancient Rome. The streets rise around you, filled with bread, voices, and steam, and even though the chaos swells, it soothes you, drawing you deeper into the hum of the city. You push forward into the heart of the city, following the sound of laughter and the smell of wine. The marble-paved forum might draw senators and orators, but your path takes you elsewhere, to the humbler streets where the ordinary people gather, places thick with chatter, smoke, and the promise of something warm in your hand. Here, you discover the taberni and Pompeii, Rome's taverns and drinking shops that doubled as fast food joints. The taberni are small, box-like spaces built right into the fronts of insulae, those tall, cramped apartment blocks stacked with families, slaves, and the occasional unlucky goat. You glance into one, its wide opening facing the street, where jars of wine line the counter. Customers lean casually against the stone, cups already half full though the sun is barely past its climb. These places sold basic food, drink, and sometimes supplies, Rome's blend of corner store, diner, and gossip hub. The Pompeii, meanwhile, feel rowdier. You edge closer and immediately hear dice rattling on wooden tables. Men slap them down with shouts of victory or groans of loss. Smoke curls from a brazier in the corner, carrying the scent of roasted sausage and herbs into the night. A woman, in a bright tunic, balances a jug of watered wine, filling cups with a practiced hand as coins clink into her palm. The air is heavy with garlic, oil, and something else, something sour, like spilled wine that never quite got mopped up out of mainstream. Fact here, Roman law tried, with little success, to control these taverns. Pompeii were sometimes restricted, seen as hangouts for the poor, the rowdy, or those with questionable morals. Senators and upper-class citizens were technically discouraged from visiting, though, let's be honest, when has a law ever kept a wealthy man from sneaking in for fried fish after too much wine? Even Cicero, that ever-quotable statesman, once mocked a rival for hanging around taverns more than was respectable. You drift inside one Pompeii, brushing past a curtain that barely shields the interior from the street. The walls are painted with murals of dancing satyrs and nymphs, cheeky reminders that merriment is the real menu here. A man slurps soup loudly at the counter, while another gnaws on a slab of bread so hard it looks more like wood than food. You take in the room, noting how it feels both intimate and chaotic, like stepping into a pub where every patron already knows each other's debts and secrets. Here comes a quirky tidbit. In some Pompeii, customers could rent dice and gaming boards right along with their meal. Imagine going into a pizza place today and asking, "Can I get a pepperoni slice and also borrow your Monopoly set?" Rome did casual entertainment with an efficiency modern fast food chains might envy.as. You sip the scene in, you can't help noticing how the lines blur. These places aren't just about eating or drinking, they're about connection. Merchants swap gossip, slaves barter news, lovers arrange meetings, gamblers curse their luck. The Pompeii hums like a hive, sticky with honey and stings alike. Historians still argue whether the reputation of these establishments was deserved. Were they really dens of vice, or simply convenient scapegoats for elites who wanted to police the behavior of the lower classes. Some records suggest brothels often hid behind the facade of taverns, while others argue most Pompeii were harmless haunts for tired workers. You glance around the smoky room and wonder yourself, does this feel dangerous or just lively? Maybe both. Outside again, the light is shifting, the streets buzzing as people slip in and out of taverns with cups in hand and crumbs on their lips. You pause to watch a group of workers leave one Pompeii, their laughter echoing as they stumble into the street, still sharing bites of bread and figs. The tavern fades behind them, but the sense of its warmth lingers, like the aftertaste of garlic and wine. You think of your own world, coffee shops on corners, neon diners glowing at midnight, convenience stores lit up like lighthouses for the weary. Rome's taberni and Pompeii were different only in detail, not in spirit. They gave people what they needed quickly: fuel, company, distraction. That combination is timeless. As you move onward, the noise of dice and the smell of frying sausages follow you faintly, blending into the wider hum of Rome. The city doesn't pause, not for meals, not for morals, not for morning or night. And neither do you, carried forward by the rhythm of sandals on stone, toward the next discovery waiting down the road. You move along the street, weaving between stalls until your eyes catch a smaller counter with no flashy frescoes, no loud gamblers, no steaming wine. Instead, the offerings are modest: bread stacked in rough piles, bowls of porridge ladled from a battered pot, a dish of olives glistening with oil. You realize you've stumbled upon the staples of the poor, the fast food that kept Rome's lower classes alive day after day. The bread is coarse, flecked with bits of bran and seeds, its crust hard enough to crack a tooth if you're not careful. A worker buys a loaf, cradling it as though it were treasure, and you understand why. Bread was the backbone of the Roman diet, so essential that the state itself distributed free grain to keep the population fed. Historians estimate that most Romans consumed bread at nearly every meal, and often it was the only thing standing between hunger and despair. The porridge, called pulse, is little more than boiled grains, millet, barley, or spelt, stirred into a mushy consistency. You watch as a young woman spoons it into a clay bowl, adds a dash of salt, and hands it to a laborer in dusty clothes. He eats quickly, scooping with his fingers, the simple fuel sliding down as his stomach quiets. You can almost feel the warmth of it, plain and comforting, like oatmeal without the sweetness, the mainstream fact to keep you grounded. Pulse wasn't just food for the poor. It was the original Roman dish, so central that the word pulse itself became shorthand for a meal. Soldiers lived on it during campaigns, and peasants ate it daily. Only later, when Rome grew wealthier and more connected to trade, did fancy flavors and imported ingredients trickle down. For most citizens, though, porridge and bread were the daily grind. And then there are the olives. Bowls of them sit glistening in oil, their salty tang cutting through the monotony of grain. A boy pops one into his mouth, scrunches his face at the sharpness, then grins as he swallows. You chuckle softly, realizing that olives were Rome's version of a cheap snack, something small, punchy, and packed with calories. Here's a quirky tidbit. Poorer Romans often flavored their bread with leftovers from winemaking, crushed grape skins, stems, and seeds, because it was cheap and added a bit of sour tang. Imagine biting into a loaf that tastes faintly like vinegar and raisins, a rough draft of the artisanal sourdough we boast about today. The poor made do, with scraps, and sometimes those scraps became oddly inventive. You lean against the wall of the stall, listening to the rhythm of transactions. Coins clink, bowls scrape, voices murmur thanks. Nobody lingers here. Food is taken quickly, eaten faster, and followed by a shuffle back into the endless flow of labor. A woman tucks half a loaf into her tunic, saving it for later. A group of children share a small bowl of porridge, each taking turns scooping with sticky fingers until the pot is scraped clean. Historians still argue whether this diet of staples was enough to keep the population healthy. Some suggest the constant reliance on bread and porridge left the poor malnourished, lacking protein and variety. Others argue that olives, beans, and the occasional scraps of fish or cheese rounded out the diet more than we think. You shrug. Inwardly, no matter the debate, the faces in front of you are real enough. each one chasing away hunger with whatever coins they can spare. The smell here is less overwhelming than in the richer stalls. No heavy sauces or sizzling meats, just the warm, grainy scent of cooked cereal and the faint brine of olives. It's not unpleasant. If anything, it feels grounding, like the honest smell of survival. You imagine waking each day knowing that this would be your meal. Simple, predictable, filling. Perhaps boring, yes, but also steadied out. A laborer next to you dunks his bread into a bowl of watery stew, softening it so it doesn't break his teeth. He sighs, wipes his forehead, and sets back off toward a construction site. Behind him, the line shuffles forward, never ending, like the beat of Rome itself. You walk away slowly, carrying with you the quiet dignity of these meals. They may not have been luxurious, but they kept the city alive. One crust of bread, one bowl of porridge, one olive at a time. You wander onward, your senses still filled with the scent of barley porridge and olives, until something different catches your nose, something richer, heavier, almost decadent. The air here is thick with spice and the faint, briny perfume of the sea. You turn a corner and suddenly you've stepped into another side of Roman street food. The luxury snacks that whispered to the wealthy, even when they pretended not to notice. The stall before you is grander than most. Its counter gleams with polished stone, decorated with painted birds and flowers. Behind it, the cook wears brighter clothing, his hands moving with an almost theatrical flourish as he lays out trays of oysters still dripping from seawater. The shells catch the light like silver coins, their insides glistening with pale, slippery flesh. A young man in a fine toga gestures impatiently, snapping his fingers as the cook pries open an oyster and squeezes a drizzle of sharp vinegar over it. The senator's son tilts back his head, slurps the oyster whole, and sighs with delight, as though this tiny bite carries the wealth of the empire in its brine. That a mainstream fact floats into your mind. Oysters were one of Rome's most prized delicacies, so popular that entire fisheries along the coast of Britain were dedicated to supplying them. Pliny the Elder, ever the encyclopedist, raved about oysters as both food and medicine. Wealthy Romans sometimes had them transported live in barrels of seawater, a seafood delivery service 2,000 years ahead of schedule. You glance down the counter and notice another dish that makes you pause. Dormice. Yes, actual dormice. Plump. Stuffed with minced pork and herbs. Roasted until their skin turns crisp and presented like tiny delicacies on a platter. They're skewered with toothpicks so you can grab one quickly, a bite-sized treat for the elite. A pair of wealthy women giggle as they nibble at the little creatures, as if daring one another to keep eating. You resist the urge to look away, reminding yourself that what seems strange to you was indulgence to them. And then there's the spiced wine. The cook ladles it from a bronze pot, steam curling in fragrant ribbons. The wine is sweetened with honey and laced with cinnamon, pepper, and perhaps even saffron, expensive imports from the far reaches of the empire. One sip and your tongue tingles, the flavors bold and layered, nothing like the plain watered wine of the poor. You realize this is Rome's answer to the luxury cocktail bar, right there on the street. Here's a quirky tidbit. Some wealthy Romans kept live moray eels in pools at their villas, not just for eating, but for impressing guests. One story even claims a man adorned his pet eel with jewelry, proof that status and food in Rome could get a little absurd. You chuckle quietly at the thought of a dinner party where the centerpiece is a fish wearing earrings. But here, at the street stall, the indulgence feels slightly rebellious. These are not formal banquets held in marble atriums with reclining couches and poetry readings. These are little guilty pleasures, enjoyed quickly, almost in secret. You watch a stern-looking magistrate glance over his shoulder before ordering. Fried sausages dipped in garum. He chews fast, wipes his mouth with his sleeve, and strides away as though nothing scandalous just happened. Historians still argue whether elites truly mingled in these stalls or whether such stories are exaggerations. Some suggest that the wealthy stuck to their lavish dinner parties, while others believe even the most proper senator couldn't resist a salty oyster on the go. The truth, perhaps, lies in between. You smile, imagining history's finest leaders sneaking fast food the way modern politicians sneak hamburgers during a campaign stop. Some cravings are simply timeless. The air here is different, richer, thicker with spice. brine, and oil. It clings to your clothes, fills your lungs, and makes you oddly hungry even as you know your modern stomach might rebel. A group of sailors cheer as they split a platter of oysters, one cracking a crude joke that earns laughter from everyone within earshot. The cook grins. He's heard them all before. You linger, watching the wealthy and not so wealthy alike hover by the counter. Coins ready, appetites open. The marble counter glows faintly in the lamplight, and for a moment you feel as though you've found the pulse of Rome itself. Indulgence wrapped inside the ordinary, luxury hidden in plain sight. You step back into the street, the taste of oysters and spiced wine lingering only in your imagination as the crowd carries you onward. You wander deeper into the city, and it's not your eyes that guide you this time, but your ears and nose. The street seems to hum with 1,000 tiny instruments. A pan of oil sizzles with chickpeas popping like miniature fireworks. A vendor drops strips of fish into hot fat, and the resulting hiss is so loud it drowns the chatter for a heartbeat. You close your eyes and just listen. The bubbling, the scraping of ladles, the clink of metal cups against stone counters. Rome is a concert, and food is its percussion section. The smells are equally insistent. Smoke from roasting chickpeas drifts upward, nutty and warm. Garlic fries slowly, its sharp edge mellowing into something sweet. Bread bakes in an oven nearby, and the yeasty cloud floats through the street like a baker's perfume. But then another smell barges in, bold and unapologetic. Garum, the infamous fish sauce. Its pungent tang hangs heavy in the air, a mix of salt, rot, and something strangely addictive. You can almost taste it just by breathing. A mainstream fact comes to mind. Garum was the ketchup of the Roman world. No matter what dish was served, beans, bread, meat, even fruit, garum often found its way into it. Amphorae of the sauce were shipped across the empire, stacked in warehouses like jars of gold. To Romans, it was delicious. To you, standing in the middle of the street, it smells like something that escaped from a dockside dumpster. You pass. A cart stacked with amphorae, their clay necks sealed with wax. The merchant proudly boasts about their origin, some from Spain, some from North Africa, each region famous for its unique brew. He waves a ladle under a customer's nose, and the man nods approvingly before handing over coins. You wonder if that customer's family will be grateful, or if they'll secretly wish he'd bought anything else. Here's a quirky tidbit. To mask the sourness of spoiled wine, Romans sometimes burned cumin or tossed pine resin into the drink. Imagine sitting down for a cozy evening and lighting a cumin-scented candle. Except the candle is your beverage. You chuckle softly. Even in antiquity, people were desperate for hacks to rescue bad drinks. But not all the smells are pleasant. You wander past a Phalonica, the laundry shop where workers use vats of urine to bleach and clean clothing. The ammonia stench blasts out, sharp enough to curl your nose hairs. You remember the Emperor Vespasian, who even taxed the collection of urine, turning waste into profit. You shake your head, muttering that capitalism clearly didn't start with Wall Street. The sounds build around you again. The rhythmic creak of wooden wheels, the calls of aquarii selling fresh water, the neigh of a horse pulling a cart. You think of Julius Caesar's law-forbidding carts with iron-rimmed wheels from daytime use because of the deafening racket. The Romans pushed them into the night hours instead, so you imagine lying in your insula bed while metal rims screech and groan like a bad orchestra rehearsal. Even in antiquity, noise complaints shaped city policy. Historians still argue whether garum's aroma was universally adored or tolerated only because it was so cheap and versatile. Some argue wealthy Romans preferred subtler, imported sauces, while others insist garum's tang was beloved across all classes. You smile at the thought. 2,000 years later, we're still bickering over condiments. Does pineapple belong on pizza? Did garum truly smell good? History never gives simple answers. The street is dense with layers of sound and smell, yet it soothes you. The sizzling oil, the roasting nuts, the clinking cups, they form a steady rhythm, like waves against a shore. Even the sharper smells, the tang of garum, the sting of vinegar, the stingy ammonia from a laundry, blend into the sensory hum. You realize this was Rome's lullaby, chaotic yet strangely calming. A group of children runs past, their hands sticky from honey cakes. One drops a piece, and instantly a stray dog swoops in, crunching happily. The children laugh, and their voices rise above the clatter, a reminder that joy, too, is part of the city's soundtrack. You drift onward, still wrapped in the chorus of sizzling, shouting, and sniff-inducing aromas. For a moment, you close your eyes again, letting the sounds and smells wash over you like a tide. Rome is not silent, and it is not sweet-smelling, but it is alive in every sense, and that is enough to carry you further down the road. You drift into another cluster of stalls, but this time it isn't just the food that catches your eye. It's the crowd. Shoulder to shoulder, Romans of every walk of life press into the same smoky air, sharing benches and counters like old friends, even when they're strangers. You watch a sailor with sunburned arms laugh as he tosses dice across a wooden tabletop. Beside him sits a freedman in worn but respectable clothing, carefully sipping watered wine. At the next stool over, a young merchant counts coins, his fingers sticky with honey cake. The city is alive with these accidental gatherings, where food stalls become the social glue holding Rome together. One mainstream fact anchors you here. The thermopolia and Pompeii weren't just kitchens, they were meeting places. Inscriptions and graffiti show that people gambled, struck business deals, and even held political discussions in these cramped corners. Think of it as Rome's equivalent of a coffee shop crossed with a sports bar, only with more olives and fewer flat screens. That a group of slaves enters, carrying their day's wages carefully tied into small pouches. They lean against the counter, ordering bowls of lentil stew and cups of cheap wine. One of them, grinning mischievously, slides a coin across the counter for a round of dice. Within minutes, the air is alive with cheers and groans as the dice clatter against the wood. You catch yourself smiling. It feels so familiar, like watching coworkers after hours gather at a bar, shaking off the dust of the day. Here's a quirky tidbit. Archaeologists found dice made of bone, bronze, and even carved ivory in the ruins of Pompeii and Herculaneum. Some were weighted to cheat, proof that gambling was as crooked then as it is now. You picture a Roman equivalent of a Vegas card shark, smirking as he pockets coins with lucky rolls, while the losers swear they'll never play again. Until tomorrow. You linger, listening to the rise and fall of voices. A freedwoman tells a story about her master's clumsy fall at the baths, and the group around her erupts in laughter. A soldier brags about his latest campaign, gesturing so wildly he nearly knocks over his cup. No one here seems to care about rank, wealth, or status. For the cost of a bowl of stew, everyone buys entry into the same warm, noisy circle. Historians still argue whether these food stalls were truly egalitarian spaces or whether subtle boundaries still kept classes apart. Did senators ever sit at the same counter as sailors? Or did they send slaves to fetch their food, keeping the mingling at arm's length? The evidence is mixed, but the scene before you feels convincing. Rome's streets pressed people together whether they liked it or not. Hunger levels the field in ways politics never could. The smells in this corner are thick with comfort. Fried chickpeas crackling in oil, fresh bread steaming as it's torn apart, and the faint metallic tang of wine being poured into bronze cups. You lean back, soaking it in, realizing that this communal energy is part of what made the stalls thrive. It wasn't just about eating, it was about belonging. Suddenly, a shout goes up as someone wins a dice game. Coins clatter onto the counter, and the loser groans, burying his face in his hands. The winner raises his cup high, grinning as the cook rolls his eyes. The laughter spreads, carrying you with it, soft and contagious. You drift away slowly, the sounds of dice, laughter, and gossip trailing behind you. The city feels less like a machine now and more like a living creature, its heart beating inside. These cramped stalls. You carry that hum with you, a reminder that even in a place as vast and divided as Rome, food had the power to pull people close. You round another bend in the crowded street, and there it is, one of the most iconic sights of Roman daily life, the thermopolium. You pause, staring at its wide-open front, the counter stretching outward as if inviting you closer. These shops are the beating heart of Roman fast food, a design so practical that even modern city planners would nod in approval. The thermopolium is instantly recognizable. Its marble counter gleams, worn smooth by generations of elbows leaning and coins clattering. Embedded in that counter are circular holes where giant clay jars, called dolia, sit sunk deep. Steam wafts up as lids are lifted, and suddenly you're enveloped in a swirl of scents: lentil stew, wine, spiced sausages, maybe even a questionable fish dish that has been bubbling since yesterday. Customers stand shoulder to shoulder, coins in hand, waiting for a ladleful of warmth that a mainstream historical fact slips into your mind. These thermopolia were everywhere. Archaeologists have uncovered more than 150 of them in Pompeii alone, frozen in place by the eruption of Vesuvius. The sheer number tells you everything. Romans weren't just occasionally grabbing a snack. For many, these stalls were their kitchens. Few insula apartments had chimneys or proper cooking space, and fire hazards were constant. It was safer and easier to let someone else do the cooking. You step closer, peering into one dolium filled with bubbling chickpeas. The cook, sleeves rolled high, stirs with a long-handled spoon, his movements practiced and almost hypnotic. He scoops stew into a rough clay bowl, sprinkles herbs across the top, and slides it across the counter to a tired-looking customer. The man doesn't sit. There are no tables here. Instead, he leans on the counter, slurps quickly, and is gone. In minutes. This isn't fine dining. It's fuel for the grind of Roman life. And yet, the space has its charm. Painted on the wall behind the counter is a mural of Mercury, god of commerce and travelers, as if blessing each exchange of coin and food. Lamps flicker against the paint, throwing shadows that make the god's face seem alive, half smiling at the trade. Here's a quirky tidbit. Some thermopolia displayed their menus on the wall, painted in bright colors, complete with little illustrations of fish, loaves, or cups of wine. Think of it as the world's earliest version of a fast food menu board, only without the glowing plastic and limited time offers. One excavated shop in Pompeii even had a fresco showing ducks, fish, and a rooster, all presumably advertised as menu options. It's oddly charming, and maybe a little unsettling, if you happen to be nibbling bread beneath the watchful eyes of a painted duck. The place is loud but strangely soothing. Cups clink, coins jingle, voices overlap. A pair of sailors argue over whose turn it is to pay, while a slave boy balances two bowls, carefully threading his way back to his master waiting outside. The cook barely looks up, his rhythm uninterrupted: scoop, sprinkle, serve, repeat. Historians still argue whether thermopolia were considered respectable. Some claim they carried a stigma associated with the poor and the rowdy. Others argue that everyone, from senators to slaves, passed through them at some point. After all, hunger doesn't check your social class. You imagine a senator slipping in for a quick cup of mulled wine, adjusting his toga nervously while pretending not to notice the builder next to him slurping lentils. The design of the thermopolium itself feels ingenious. The counters face outward, turning the act of eating into a public performance. No dark tavern atmosphere here. Everything is in full view. You realize that in a city where space is cramped and privacy rare, food itself became a social glue, something shared in sight of others. Binding lives together in small but constant ways. You lean on the counter, feeling its cool marble beneath your arms. It's oddly calming, the way the stone anchors you while the world bustles past. The cook notices your glance and offers a ladleful of stew. You imagine tasting it: salty, earthy, maybe a little too heavy with garlic. But it's hot, it's filling, and it's exactly what a tired Roman worker would need before heading back into the day. The sun climbs higher, lighting up the counter, making the jars gleam. You linger a little longer, watching another batch of customers shuffle through, then let yourself drift back into the street. The thermopolium fades behind you, but its warmth and rhythm cling to you, like a lullaby set to the sound of ladles and laughter. And as you walk on, you realize you've found something strangely comforting. Fast food, ancient or modern, isn't just about eating quickly. It's about the reassurance that somewhere nearby, no matter the hour, there will always be a pot bubbling and a counter waiting. You drift farther down the winding street until the glow of another thermopolium beckons, its marble counter catching the sun. You step inside and this time lean closer to the dolia, the big, sunken clay jars that sit like ancient cauldrons, their rims level with the counter. The cook lifts a lid, and a puff of fragrant steam rolls out, dampening the air around. Your face. Inside, lentils bubble lazily, their earthy smell mingling with the sharper tang of vinegar and fish sauce. Another lid creaks open, and your nose twitches. This jar holds wine sweetened with honey, warmed gently so that it smells less like a drink and more like an invitation to sink into a nap. Beside it, a pot of barley porridge simmers, speckled with dried fruits that plump and float like tiny jewels. The jars aren't beautiful, they're cracked and blackened with use. But their contents are alive with aroma, reminding you that food is about warmth before it is about perfection. Here's your mainstream fact for this stop. The dolia weren't just storage vessels, they were carefully designed. Their thick clay walls retained heat, turning the counter itself into one long, shared stove. Some shops even swapped lids throughout the day, changing what bubbled inside. Morning might bring porridge and wine, while later hours served soups, stews, or chunks of meat soaking in sauce. You realize this counter was Rome's version of a slow cooker buffet. You glance around at the customers. A man in rough work clothes dunks his bread straight into a jar before anyone can stop him, soaking it with oily broth. The cook smacks his hand with a spoon, not too hard, just enough to make a point, before ladling out a proper portion. Behind you, a woman whispers about which dolium holds the freshest stew, as if picking between fine vintages. The truth? Most of these pots probably tasted more or less the same. Heavy, salty, and endlessly filling. And here's a quirky tidbit. Archaeologists found remnants of snails inside some dolia, charred and seasoned. Yes, snails, tiny mollusks simmered with herbs. They were a popular snack, especially when roasted. Picture yourself scooping snails from a bubbling jar, the shells clicking against your teeth. Not exactly the kind of takeout you'd expect. Unless your favorite burger place suddenly started serving escargot in paper bags, the counter is alive with movement. Coins clatter, bowls scrape, and the occasional curse flies when someone elbows ahead in line. A small boy perches on tiptoe to see over the marble, his eyes wide as he watches ladles dip in and out of the jars. When the cook finally hands him a bowl, it looks comically large in his hands. He cradles it carefully, then slurps with such gusto that broth runs down his chin. His mother sighs, wipes his face, and takes a sip herself. Historians still argue whether the jars were kept perfectly clean or whether yesterday's stew simply merged into today's batch, like an eternal pot never emptied. Some say this practice added depth of flavor. Others hint it just made for spoiled food and stomachaches. You smirk at the thought. The Romans may have invented this secret recipe crock pot, but maybe they also invented heartburn. You lean in closer to one dolium, watching how the surface shimmers with oil. Spices float lazily. Coriander seeds, fennel, maybe crushed pepper. The cook sprinkles in herbs from a pouch tied at his waist, stirring as though each flick of his wrist is second nature. The smell is intoxicating, though you know it probably tastes far more rustic than refined. That a sailor elbows his way to the counter, coins jingling, and demands wine. The cook plunges a ladle deep into the jar, drawing up a steaming crimson swirl that he pours into a battered cup. The sailor throws it back in one gulp, sighs deeply, and sets the cup down with such force it rattles the counter. He wipes his mouth with the back of his hand, then lurches out into the street, already humming a tune. For a moment, you simply watch the jars bubble and steam. They feel timeless, like little portals where food and time mingle together. You realize that these dolia weren't just about storage, they were about spectacle. The act of seeing, smelling, and hearing food as it cooked in the open was part of the draw. It was public cooking, performance, and necessity rolled into one. That you step back into the street, the memory of bubbling jars still warm in your nose. As the crowd swirls around you, you carry that picture with you. Clay jars sunk in marble, each one a humble cauldron feeding a city that never slowed down. You wander down a quieter alley, and instead of the lively front counters and chatter of customers, you find yourself peeking behind the scenes. Here, the air is thicker, hotter, and busier, and the real magic, or chaos, of Roman fast food unfolds. These are the hidden kitchens of the city, cramped spaces tucked behind marble counters, where cooks labor endlessly to keep Rome fed. The first thing you notice is the heat. Fires roar inside clay ovens, smoke curling up and escaping through small vents, or, sometimes, just billowing straight into the room. The cooks work half-blind in the haze, their faces slick with sweat, their hands moving without pause. One chops herbs on a wooden board worn nearly smooth, while another sprinkles salt into a pan of boiling beans. The rhythm is frantic, like a drumbeat that never slows down. A mainstream fact slides into your thoughts. Most thermopolia didn't have elaborate kitchens like we imagine today. Instead, their back rooms were little more than storage shelves, fire pits, and workbenches. Meals weren't cooked to order. They were prepared in bulk, kept hot in dolia, and dished out as customers arrived. It was efficiency at its purest, a system designed to move food fast. You crouched to look at a basket filled with onions, garlic, and leeks, humble staples ready to flavor another batch of stew. Beside it sits a clay jar of garum, its lid crusted with dried fish sauce. A young assistant scoops from it with careless precision, adding ladle after ladle into whatever pot is closest. The smell hits you like a slap, pungent, salty, and almost daring you to complain. Here's a quirky tidbit. Ancient graffiti found in Pompeii suggests that some cooks took immense pride in their skills, bragging that their soups or stews were the best in town. You imagine a young Roman line cook carving into a wall, "Best lentils in the city, fight me." Centuries before Yelp reviews and one-star complaints about slow service, the kitchen itself is alive with voices. A head cook shouts orders, his tone sharp, though his hands never stop stirring. A boy scurries between pots, refilling water jars, dodging the occasional swat from a spoon when he moves too slowly. Someone drops a clay cup, and it shatters into sharp fragments, met with groans but no pause in the rhythm. These people don't stop. Not until the jars are filled, the bread delivered, and the coins counted. Historians still argue whether these cooks were respected artisans or looked down upon as mere servants. Some inscriptions praise skilled chefs who earned fame, while others mock them as gluttons feeding vice. You look at the sweat dripping down their faces, the burns on their arms, and the quick, precise movements of their hands, and you suspect the truth lies somewhere in between, respect or not. Without them, Rome's streets would have been silent and hungry. The smells here are layered and intense. Bread toasting until its crust darkens, beans boiling with herbs, meat sizzling over open flame. It's less polished than the front counter, more raw, more honest. You can almost feel the textures, the sticky oil coating the walls, the rough-grained sacks spilling onto the floor, the damp clay of freshly washed bowls stacked precariously. In a corner, you linger for a moment, watching a cook roll dough into flat cakes and slap them onto hot stones. They puff up slightly, browning at the edges, filling the room with warmth. He flips one with his bare hands, unfazed by the heat, and stacks it onto a pile that disappears into hungry hands seconds later. The cycle is endless. Make, serve, repeat. Like a lullaby whispered through fire and smoked. As you step back into the street, the hidden kitchen fades behind you, but its rhythm stays in your ears. You realize that the heart of Roman fast food wasn't the marble counter where coins clinked. It was these cramped, smoky back rooms where anonymous hands worked tirelessly. Without them, the city's grand avenues and bustling crowds would have been nothing but hungry silence. Back on the main street again, you notice a stall where the counter jars don't hold stew or porridge, but liquids shimmering in the lamplight. The voices of thirsty customers rise above the din, and you realize you've stepped into another essential piece of Rome's quick meal culture. The drinks on the go. A man in a sweat-stained tunic slaps down a coin, and the vendor hands him a cup filled with watered wine. The man gulps it in 3 swallows, sighs, and wipes his mouth with the back of his hand before heading back toward the baths. To you, the drink seems thin, but in Rome, this was the norm. A mainstream fact slips into your thoughts. Romans almost never drank wine neat. They considered undiluted wine barbaric, a habit of uncivilized peoples. Instead, wine was usually cut with water, sometimes hot, sometimes cold, depending on the season. Even the cheapest taverns kept large jugs of water on hand to stretch the wine and to soften its sharpness. The next counter, another vendor sells pasca, a sour mix of water, vinegar, and herbs. Soldiers swore by it, farmers drank it, and the poor loved it for its affordability. You watch a group of day laborers sip pasca from chipped cups, their faces brightening as though the drink refreshed them more than plain water ever could. It's tangy, sharp, and oddly invigorating. You think of it as the Roman version of an energy drink. Not pleasant in taste, but oddly effective. Here's a quirky tidbit. Some taverns served a concoction called mulsum, wine mixed with honey, which sweetened the drink and made it feel more luxurious. It was so popular that some cooks even warmed it with spices, creating something like an ancient hot toddy. You picture a Roman sipping mulsum by the counter, sighing in contentment, while muttering that this batch is not as good as last year's. The more things change, the more they stay the same. The stalls didn't stop at wine and pasca. Beer, though often mocked as a barbarian's drink, could be found, especially from provinces like Gaul or Egypt. You overhear a merchant teasing a friend about his foamy Gaulish brew, the way modern friends might rib someone for ordering a fruity cocktail. You almost chuckle aloud, realizing beer has always been a little divisive. Historians still argue whether these drinks were safe substitutes for water or whether they simply masked the taste of bad water. Some scholars point to Rome's aqueducts and public fountains as proof that clean water was plentiful, while others insist urban pollution made drinks like pasca and wine far safer. You shrug inwardly, whether by safety or by taste. Most Romans seemed far more comfortable sipping watered wine than plain fountain water. The atmosphere around these drink stalls is different from food counters. The energy is lighter, quicker, more fleeting. Customers don't linger over their cups. They drink, talk briefly, and move on. Yet in that brevity, there's something comforting. A sip of pasca here, a gulp of mulsum there. It kept the city in motion, lubricating not just throats, but the rhythm of daily life. You stand near a group of sailors trading jokes, their cups sloshing dangerously as they laugh. A soldier leans in, raising his drink in mock salute, while another smacks the counter for a refill. The vendor barely looks up, already pouring from the next jug. It's a constant stream, flowing as endlessly as the aqueducts that fed the city itself. You take in the smells: sour vinegar sharp in your nose, honeyed wine sweet and floral, stale beer yeasty and heavy. Each scent tells a story, each cup a small anchor in the long day of Rome. And though you never taste a drop, you feel oddly refreshed just standing among them, letting the chatter, clinking cups, and laughter wash over you. As you step away, the hum of voices fades into the larger roar of the city. You realize that these drinks weren't just refreshments. They were rituals, tiny pauses in the rush of Roman life, binding soldier, sailor, and scribe in the shared comfort of something poured quickly into a waiting cup. You let the laughter fade behind you, but as you round another corner, the mood shifts. The voices here aren't filled with cheer, they carry a sharper edge. An older man in a dark toga stands at the doorway of a papina, scowling as though the mere existence of the tavern offends him. He mutters to a companion about corruption, laziness, and the dangers of cheap wine. You pause nearby, realizing you've stumbled into the realm of moral worries and laws. The constant debate over whether Rome's food stalls were nourishment or menace. A mainstream fact first. The Roman Senate often tried to regulate taverns and food stalls. Laws restricted what they could sell, when they could open, and even who could enter. One statute forbade selling cooked meat in certain shops, while others banned gambling or limited the hours of operation. Officials fretted that Pompeii encouraged drunkenness, crime, and the mixing of classes in ways that threatened social order. You smile wryly. If history teaches anything, it's that governments love to police where people eat and drink. You step inside one of these suspect places, ducking through the low doorway. The air is thick, not with menace, but with garlic, smoke, and sweat. A handful of men crouch around a table, tossing dice and shouting half-hearted insults. A woman pours wine with one hand while balancing a toddler on her hip. Nothing about this scene screams crime den. Yet you know critics used exactly this image to paint such establishments as breeding grounds of vice. Here's a quirky tidbit. Emperor Tiberius supposedly once considered banning taverns altogether, fearing they encouraged idleness. The plan fizzled, perhaps because even emperors realized shutting down food stalls would cause riots. Bread and circuses may have kept the masses happy, but cheap stew and dice games probably did half the work. Still, the criticism lingered. You hear it in the muttered complaint of a passing priest. that Pompeii seduced the young with strong wine. You catch it in the sneer of a wealthy matron who quickens her step as she passes, clutching her cloak as though garlic fumes alone might stain her reputation. And yet, even as they scold, people still shuffle inside, coins ready. Historians still argue whether these moral condemnations reflected real dangers or were just classist sneers. Were taverns actually hotbeds of crime, or did elites simply dislike seeing the poor gather in ways they couldn't control? Archaeological evidence shows dice, drinking vessels, and graffiti in abundance. But does that prove debauchery or just ordinary fun? You lean against the counter, watching a gambler cheer as his lucky throw wins him a plate of fried fish, and you suspect the truth is far less dramatic than the law suggested. Outside again, you catch the sound of an official's voice booming down the street. A town crier announces a new edict: fines for taverns caught serving after dark. The crowd groans, but barely slows their steps. You realize these rules are like raindrops on stone. They fall endlessly, but the street life continues, eroding the law with every ladle of stew and every sip of wine. You walk on, struck by the tension between judgment and appetite. Rome worried about the morality of its food stalls, but Rome also kept them alive. And as you pass another thermopolium filled with the smells of chickpeas and herbs, you know which force truly shaped the streets. Not laws, but hunger. You drift back into the bustle of the main road, where the noise of hammers on stone and the chatter of scribes at their wax tablets spills into the street. The air smells faintly of dust, sweat, and fresh mortar. Rome is a city constantly building itself, and all that work requires steady fuel. You pause to watch groups of workers peel away from their tasks and slip into food stalls, seeking the quick comfort of a meal in the middle of their day. The first to catch your eye is a crew of builders, their tunics streaked with lime dust, and their arms thick from hauling stone. They stomp into a thermopolium, dropping a handful of coins on the counter before demanding bowls of stew. The cook ladles out portions of lentils, heavy with garlic and pepper, while one worker tears his bread into chunks to soak up the broth. They eat fast, speaking with mouths full, already thinking about the next block of stone to lift that a mainstream fact comes to you. The Roman workday was often divided into segments, with a light snack in the morning and a larger meal, prandium, taken at midday. This was not a leisurely lunch, but a functional one, eaten quickly so laborers and clerks could return to their duties. Inscriptions even mention fast meals served to workers at construction sites or workshops, showing how the city itself relied on such efficient eating to keep projects moving. Not far away, a group of scribes finishes copying scrolls at a public office and heads to a papina. They sit hunched together, nibbling on olives and sipping watered wine, their waxed fingers leaving smudges on their cups. They gossip about magistrates, laugh at their employer's stinginess, and then stand to leave, the meal over in moments. You recognize the same rhythm you've seen in every break room of your own world. Snatch a bite, share a joke, and rush back before the supervisor notices you've been gone too long. Here's a quirky tidbit. Some bathhouses in Rome included small food stalls inside or nearby, so patrons could grab a snack after sweating in the caldarium. Imagine stepping out of the steam room, still dripping, and immediately ordering a bowl of chickpeas with garlic sauce. The idea sounds bizarre, but the Romans seemed perfectly comfortable combining hygiene, relaxation, and street food in one outing. You trail behind a group of men leaving the baths, their hair still damp, as they stop at a stall for skewers of roasted meat. The fat drips onto the coals, sending up a smoke that curls into the air and clings to their skin. They eat standing, laughing, trading stories from the arena as grease runs down their wrists. It's messy, it's hurried, and it's unmistakably satisfying. Historians still argue whether these meals were considered proper sustenance or merely a way to bridge the gap until dinner, the more formal cena eaten in the evening. Some sources suggest midday food was a light affair. Others describe it as hearty, especially for laborers. You watch a stonemason polish off an entire loaf of bread with his stew, then order more wine, and decide the truth depended on how hard the day had been. The sounds of work never vanish completely. Even as you linger at the stall, you hear the clang of chisels and the chatter of apprentices just beyond the doorway. Rome doesn't pause for long. Even its meals are laced with urgency. Yet that urgency hums like white noise, calming in its constancy. The scrape of bowls, the snap of bread crust, the sigh of a tired man leaning on a counter, all of it blends into a rhythm that makes you drowsy, like listening to the heartbeat of the city itself. You step back into the street, watching workers return to their sites and scribes vanish into offices. The stalls empty for a moment, then fill again as another wave arrives. The cycle repeats endlessly, proof that fast food in Rome wasn't just about taste. It was the machinery that kept the city's endless labor in motion. The streets feel louder now, almost festive, and you realize it isn't just an ordinary day. Banners hang across the roadway, fluttering in the breeze. Vendors shout louder than usual, hawking their food with a touch of showmanship. The calendar has flipped to one of Rome's endless festivals, and with it, the food stalls transform. You squeeze into the crowd, swept along by voices chanting and music drifting from flutes. Children dart through the throng with sticky hands, clutching sweets wrapped in fig leaves. Everywhere you look, stalls overflow with color and smell. This is Rome turned into one giant fairground. A mainstream fact first. Festivals in Rome were constant. The Ferii dotted the calendar, honoring gods, victories, or seasonal cycles, and they often brought feasts to the streets. During Saturnalia, for instance, normal roles reversed, masters served slaves, and food flowed freely. Even the humblest families could taste luxuries they normally couldn't afford, because stalls and taverns poured into the celebration with extra offerings. A T1 counter. You watch skewers of meat roasting over open flames. The fat drips down, sizzling against the coals, releasing a smoky perfume that mingles with the sharper scent of spiced wine. A man turns the skewers with practiced flicks, handing them to a waiting line of revelers who bite greedily before dancing. Back into the crowd. Nearby, a woman sells honey cakes shaped like tiny animals. They glisten in the sunlight, sticky with syrup. Children squeal as they choose their favorites, and the cook laughs, dusting their heads with flour as though blessing them with sweetness. You smile, realizing that in moments like this, even the food stalls felt magical. That here's a quirky tidbit. During certain festivals, Romans made special pastries called strews, flat cakes piled high and decorated with honey and poppy seeds. Some accounts suggest they were stacked into towers, resembling ancient layer cakes. Imagine balancing a wobbly tower of pastries through a cheering crowd while praying no child jumps up to steal the top piece. The atmosphere hums like a living organism. Drums beat in the distance, dancers stomp their feet, and the crowd surges like a tide around the stalls. You notice a senator's son, toga slightly crooked, devouring roasted chestnuts beside a farmer's boy. No one seems to care about status today. Festivals blurred those lines, at least for a little while. Historians still argue whether these public feasts genuinely fostered unity or simply masked social tension. Did sharing spiced wine and honey cakes really bring classes together, or did the poor simply get a temporary taste of the luxuries they could never sustain? You watch the joyful chaos and decide it probably didn't matter to those caught in the moment. A hot skewer of meat and a cup of mulled wine could make anyone forget, at least for a day. The smells are intoxicating. Cinnamon and pepper rising from pots of hot wine, roasted nuts crunching underfoot, fried dough sizzling in pans. Your senses are overwhelmed, yet oddly soothed. Each smell carries warmth. Each bite offered freely seems to bind the crowd tighter together. You follow the procession for a while, weaving between stalls as music swells and laughter bursts. The food is everywhere, passed from hand to hand, as though the entire city has turned into one great communal table. Even as you grow drowsy in the crowd, you can't help but feel the heartbeat of Rome pounding with joy, fed by skewers, sweets, and endless cups raised in celebration. The festival noise fades as you leave the city gates, following a dusty road lined with cypress trees. Out here, the hum of Rome quiets into the steady clop of hooves and the creak of wagon wheels. But even beyond the walls, the Romans made sure no traveler went hungry. Roadside stalls and inns at the highways, offering quick meals for merchants, couriers, and soldiers who couldn't afford to stop for long. The first one you see is little more than a shack with a thatched roof, a wooden counter facing the road. Smoke drifts from a small fire pit where skewers of meat crackle over coals. A cart driver pulls up, ties his mule to a post, and slumps at the counter. The vendor ladles him a bowl of barley stew and sets down a hunk of coarse bread. The driver eats with one hand, scratching his mule's ear with the other. It's simple, efficient, and exactly what he needs before the next leg of his journey. A mainstream fact anchors the scene. Rome's vast network of roads stretched across the empire, tens of thousands of miles connecting Italy to Britain, Gaul, and the Near East. Along these routes stood mansions, official way stations, and Caponi, inns, many of which offered food that blurred the line between tavern and fast food stall. These stops weren't luxurious, but they kept trade, communication, and armies moving. You edge closer to one such inn. The doorway is low, the air smoky, the smell of wine and wet straw heavy inside. Merchants sit on benches, bowls of lentils in front of them, while a courier with dust on his cloak downs a cup of pasca before dashing off again. A soldier leans on the counter, his helmet resting beside his bowl. He eats quickly, never letting go of the pouch tied to his belt. The innkeeper moves briskly, ladling stew, pouring wine, and sweeping coins into a jar without missing a beat. Here's a quirky tidbit. Ancient writers often mocked roadside inns for their poor quality. Marshall once joked that the bread at such places could chip your teeth, and others complained that the wine was so watered down it barely deserved the name. Yet travelers still flocked to them, because bad food was better than no food. You smile at the thought. It's not so different from stopping at a questionable highway diner today, grumbling about the coffee but drinking it anyway. The sounds out here are different from the city. Instead of dice and laughter, you hear animals braying, wagons groaning, and the occasional sharp shout of an innkeeper demanding payment. The smells, though, are just as potent: grilled meat, garlic, sour wine, and the faint musk of damp hay. You wrinkle your nose but can't help being comforted. This blend means shelter, warmth, and sustenance on the road. Historians still argue whether these roadside stops were dangerous dens for thieves or essential lifelines for travelers. Some accounts paint them as hotbeds of crime, warning merchants to guard their purses, while others suggest they were merely noisy, rough, but harmless places. You glance around at the soldiers, the weary merchants, the quick hands of the innkeeper, and decide both might be true. A safe meal here probably depended on luck as much as on coins. A wagon pulls in, its driver groaning as he climbs down. He orders quickly, tears into a loaf of bread, and gulps half a cup of wine before even sitting. His eyes already wander toward the horizon. There's no lingering when the road still stretches for miles. Meals here are swallowed, not savored. You stand back, watching the cycle repeat. Travelers arrive, eat, leave. The innkeeper never stops moving. It feels less like hospitality and more like machinery, a constant flow that keeps the empire running. Out here, fast food isn't indulgence or leisure. It's survival on the move. As you step back onto the road, the cypress trees sway gently, and the sounds of wagons fade into the distance. The stall smoke lingers in your clothes, a reminder that even outside the great city walls, Rome's hunger never truly paused. The silence of Pompeii lingers as you step into another preserved corner. This time, your eyes are drawn not to the counters or the dolia, but to the walls themselves. Scratched into plaster, smeared in charcoal, or painted hastily in red letters, the graffiti and menu boards of ancient Rome still cling stubbornly to life. You run your fingers across faint letters and realize you're staring at the world's earliest takeout reviews, advertisements, and doodles. A mainstream fact roots. You hear, Pompeii and Herculaneum are famous not just for their buildings, but for their walls covered in everyday writing. More than 11,000 graffiti inscriptions have been cataloged, many of them linked to taverns, Pompeii, and thermopolia. These weren't carved with a chisel by professionals. They were scratched by customers, workers, and bored passersby. In other words, authentic voices of everyday Romans, preserved like the ghost of conversation. You lean closer to one scrawl that reads, "I was here with the girls." Simple, cheeky, and oddly timeless. Another proclaims, "Good bread and good wine at Nasiria's stall." It's the ancient equivalent of a 5-star Yelp review, etched proudly into stone. And then you see another that mutters, "The wine here is watered too much." You laugh softly. realizing some poor vendor had to endure a one-star graffiti rating long before TripAdvisor. Here's a quirky tidbit. Some graffiti weren't reviews at all, but little jokes or drawings. One wall shows a crude doodle of a fish next to the words, "I sold this one bigger than it was." Another reveals a tic-tac-toe board scratched into plaster, half-finished, as if a pair of customers got distracted by their stew before finishing the game. Not all writing was casual. In certain stalls, painted boards advertised what was for sale: a rooster pictured for poultry, a jug for wine, a fish for seafood. Prices sometimes accompanied the drawings, telling customers exactly how much a meal would cost. Imagine a Roman strolling by, glancing at a fresco of a duck with two asses painted beneath it, and deciding whether dinner was in the budget. Historians still argue whether these writings were spontaneous customer notes or whether some were actually orchestrated by the owners as subtle marketing. Were they truly authentic graffiti, or were some deliberately planted to praise the shop? The line blurs. You think of modern restaurants putting customer favorites on their walls and realize maybe ancient Rome wasn't so different after all. The walls hum with voices if you let them. You can almost hear the banter. One man praising the bread, another griping about the wine, a lover leaving a secret message for his partner, a gambler sketching dice while waiting for another round. Each scratch, each letter is a fragment of daily life, layered like whispers that refuse to die. The smell of the counters creeps back into your nose. Sour wine, garlic, charred bread. You picture the customers leaning against these very walls, bowls in hand, while they etch their thoughts with whatever sharp tool they carried. Perhaps they never meant their words to last. Yet here they are, centuries later, letting you eavesdrop across time. You step back, gazing at the patchwork of words and images. Some are clumsy, some elegant, all profoundly human. They remind you that history isn't built only by emperors and battles. It's built by hungry, impatient customers scratching "This place has good stew" into plaster. And in that ordinary act, you feel the extraordinary closeness of people who lived and ate exactly where you stand. As you move on, the walls fade into shadow, but their messages linger in your mind. Rome's food stalls didn't just feed bodies. They gave voices to the voiceless, preserved in charcoal and scratches, reminding you that appetite and opinion have always walked hand in hand. You leave behind the scratched walls of Pompeii and step once more into the bustling arteries of Rome itself. This time, your attention shifts not to the counters or the crowds, but to the flavors flowing into the city from every corner of the empire. Rome wasn't just a capital of politics and legions. It was a sponge, soaking up taste from faraway provinces and blending them into its fast food stalls that at one thermopolia. You catch the earthy smell of lentils simmering. The cook proudly announces that they come from Egypt, shipped up the Nile. And across the Mediterranean, their reputation for quality so strong that merchants paid dearly to get them. Customers nod appreciatively, as though eating lentils from Egypt elevates the humble stew into something exotic. The mainstream fact anchors this scene. Rome's empire stretched across 3 continents, and its food supply depended heavily on imports. Grain flowed in from North Africa, olives from Spain, hams from Gaul, fish sauce from the Iberian coast. Fast food stalls reflected that diversity, offering city dwellers tastes they could never have grown or made themselves. You wander a little further and catch the scent of smoked pork from Gaul, hung in strips above a counter. The vendor slices it thin, serving it with coarse bread. A soldier leans in, remarking that the taste reminds him of a campaign in the provinces. He chews slowly, the flavor pulling him back to muddy camps and foreign fields. You realize that food was memory as much as sustenance. Here's a quirky tidbit. Amphorae from Spain have been found stacked in such vast quantities in Rome's port of Ostia that they created literal hills of discarded jars. Archaeologists call one mound Monte Testaccio, essentially an ancient landfill of broken amphorae, proof of how much imported oil and wine fueled the city. Imagine a mountain not of stone, but of empty takeout containers. Rome had one, and it's still there today. At another stall, a tray of sauces gleams under the sunlight. The cook mixes one with a reddish powder, claiming it comes from Beetica in Spain. Another sauce, darker and richer, he swears is Egyptian in style. Customers dip bread, comparing flavors like connoisseurs at a tasting. You smile. Ancient Romans debated their sauces the way modern foodies argue over craft beer or artisanal ketchup. Historians still argue whether ordinary Romans appreciated these imported flavors or whether only the wealthy cared about the provenance of their food. Was a poor laborer truly excited about Egyptian lentils, or did he just eat whatever was cheapest? The debate lingers, but as you watch customers slurp eagerly, it feels clear that variety itself was the appeal. Even if they didn't know the trade routes, they tasted the empire in every bite. The smells here are layered and strange. Earthy lentils, smoky pork, sharp vinegar, salty garum. One moment you think of North Africa, the next of Gaul, then back to Rome. It's as though the empire itself has folded into this one street corner, offering a world tour without leaving the counter that a group of sailors sits nearby, their accents. A jumble of provinces. They raise cups of wine sweetened with honey from Hispania, their laughter thick with stories of storms and ports. One passes around dried figs from Syria, sticky and sweet, which vanish in seconds among the group. It's a feast of geography, each flavor carrying the weight of miles traveled. You step back, gazing at the stalls with fresh eyes. They aren't just kitchens, they're maps, edible cartographies of empire. Every bowl, every loaf, every salty bite of fish sauce tells the story of ships, roads, merchants, and conquests. You realize that eating in Rome wasn't just about surviving another day. It was about tasting the vastness of the world Rome claimed as its own. And as you wander on, the memory lingers like spice on the tongue. Rome's fast food was never just Roman. It was global centuries before the word existed. You follow the road back into Rome, slipping once more into the crowded hum of the city. As the streets swallow you up again, a thought lingers. These stalls, these steaming jars and smoky counters, feel strangely familiar. You pause, leaning against a marble column, and allow yourself a quiet chuckle. The more you think about it, the more these ancient thermopolia resemble something you know all too well, modern fast food. Look closely, the parallels leap out. You see a line forming at a counter, customers clutching coins and waiting impatiently, while the cook ladles stew. Isn't this just the ancient version of standing in line at a burger chain, staring at the glowing menu board? A sailor slurps his wine so fast he nearly spills it. You think of the teenager downing a soda before racing back to class. A group of laborers split a loaf of bread, dunking pieces into the same pot. Not so different from friends tearing into a box of fries. Here's your mainstream fact. In cities like Pompeii, roughly one thermopolium existed for every 100 citizens. A ratio that makes sense only when you realize just how much people depended on them. Compare that to today, when a modern city corner might boast 3 coffee shops and a pizza place all crammed together. The craving for quick, cheap, and communal food clearly isn't new. It's an urban necessity. You notice another detail: the design of the counters. The marble slabs with built-in jars mirror the layout of today's salad bars or hot tables. Customers pick what's steaming, it's scooped up fast, and they're on their way. The efficiency is almost comforting. You imagine Caesar himself, impatiently tapping his sandal like a man in a drive-thru, muttering, "Can I just get my stew already?" Here's a quirky tidbit. Archaeologists discovered graffiti in Pompeii that basically amounted to customer reviews. One scratched line praises a tavern for its good wine. Another complains about being cheated on the measure. Think about that. The Yelp wars of 79 CE, etched into plaster instead of posted online. Some habits really do outlive empires. You glance at the crowd and notice how branding sneaks in too. Some stalls paint bright murals of fish, ducks, or amphorae, proudly advertising their specialties. Doesn't that echo the golden arches or neon logos that pierce your own skyline? A duck painted on the wall 2 millennia ago was Rome's version of over 1 billion served. Historians still argue whether these parallels are accurate comparisons or modern overreach. Did Romans think of thermopolia as fast food, or is that just a convenient metaphor for us? The debate rages, but as you watch another tired laborer grab a bowl of lentils and shuffle away in under a minute, the resemblance feels undeniable. The sounds echo your suspicion. Coins clinking like change at a cash register, bowls scraping like trays being tossed, vendors shouting specials in the same sing-song tone as someone asking, Do you want fries with that? The rhythm is universal, and it carries you forward, half amused, half soothed. And then you notice one more thing: late-night hunger. Rome didn't have neon lights, but some stalls stayed open into the dark, their oil lamps glowing softly. You can almost imagine a student stumbling out of a lecture, a soldier off duty, or a weary traveler stopping by for one last cup of wine before sleep. Isn't that the same scene as a 24-hour diner, where night owls and stragglers huddle under fluorescent bulbs? You drift further, smiling at the thought. Ancient or modern, the hunger is the same. The stall, the cook, the quick meal pressed into your hand. It's all part of the same story. And the city hums with it, a reminder that no matter how far you travel in time, some cravings never change. You wander into a quieter quarter where the modern roar of Rome falls away into something softer, almost museum-like. The cobblestones beneath your feet feel frozen, the air heavier, as though the city itself has paused. And then you realize why. You're no longer just imagining ancient Rome, you're walking among its echoes. You've slipped into Pompeii, that city trapped in time, where archaeological clues tell us exactly how fast food stalls looked and felt nearly 2,000 years ago. The street is eerily still, but the thermopolia here remain. Counters of marble still stand, their dolias sunken in place, waiting for stews that will never bubble again. Some are decorated with bright frescoes, ducks, fish, roosters, all vibrant despite the centuries. You trail your fingers across the stone, cool and smooth, and feel the faint grooves left by ancient hands sliding coins across. That a mainstream fact roots you here. Excavations at Pompeii have uncovered more than 150 thermopolia, making them one of the most common types of businesses in the city. In 2020, archaeologists revealed one particularly stunning example, with counters still painted in vivid colors and even food residue preserved inside the jars. Bits of pork, fish, and beans had been carbonized by Vesuvius's heat, telling us exactly what Romans were eating that day in 79 CE. You kneel beside one dolium, its interior darkened by centuries. Imagine it once filled with lentils simmering in garum, the smell rolling into the street. Now it holds only silence, yet that silence tells its own story. Food stalls weren't side characters in Rome. They were lifelines, so ordinary and so essential that they stood on nearly every corner. Here's a quirky tidbit. In one Pompeii thermopolium, archaeologists found the skeleton of a dog lying near the counter, likely trapped as the eruption struck. Beside it, a small bronze ladle was discovered, still ready to scoop stew. The detail is heartbreaking and oddly intimate, as if the city's last moments were captured mid-meal. You step back and gaze at the frescoes. One shows a rooster with bright red feathers, another a pair of ducks. The images aren't just art, they're advertisements. They told hungry passersby what they could buy inside, just as a neon burger sign does today. The paintings still glow against the plaster, vibrant as if painted last week, proof of how central these stalls were to Pompeii's daily rhythm. Historians still argue whether Pompeii's preserved food remains were special festival dishes or just ordinary fare. Some think the presence of rich meats like duck suggests celebration. Others insist that even humble stalls occasionally offered small luxuries. The debate lingers, but either way, you can almost taste the salt, the herbs, the tang of vinegar that once filled the air. You wander deeper, past another thermopolium where amphories still stand in the corner, their clay mouths cracked but intact. You imagine the workers who once filled them with wine, olive oil, or garum, never knowing their supplies would turn to relics. The scene is frozen, but it vibrates with life if you let your imagination layer the sounds back in. Clinking cups, sizzling oil, murmured gossip. There's something soothing in the stillness, too. The chaos of Rome fades into quiet here. The food stalls don't clamor for attention. They wait, patiently, like old storytellers. You linger at the counter, closing your eyes, letting the silence merge with memory. For just a moment, it feels as though you can hear the ancient cook humming as he ladles stew, the customer sighing with relief as the warmth hits his belly. And then you step away, leaving the preserved counters behind, carrying with you the uncanny reminder that food, laughter, and hunger once filled these same streets. Pompeii may be silent now, but its thermopolia still whisper, "We fed the city, we kept it alive." The street grows a little quieter now, though not calmer. You step into a corner where the scents are less inviting and more questionable. A pot of oil bubbles with a faint, acrid edge, and when the vendor dips a skewer of fish into it, the smoke makes your eyes water. You realize you've wandered into the less glamorous side of Roman fast food. The hygiene risks and health hazards that simmered alongside every meal. One mainstream fact steadies you. Food safety in ancient Rome was shaky at best. Without refrigeration, meat and fish spoiled quickly, especially under the Mediterranean sun. Oil, reused day after day, grew rancid. Wine was watered down partly to stretch it, but also to mask the sourness of batches already turning. For many Romans, eating at a stall was a gamble, not just with dice, but with their stomachs. You glance at the dolia, those deep clay jars, and wonder, were they ever fully scrubbed clean? Some historians suggest cooks simply kept topping them up, letting yesterday's stew blend into today's, creating a kind of eternal soup. The thought makes you smile and shudder at the same time. Eternal flavor or eternal food poisoning? Historians still argue whether this practice enriched the taste or created stomach-churning hazards. Here's a quirky tidbit. Roman writers occasionally joked about funeral banquets that followed bad tavern meals, implying that food poisoning was common enough to inspire humor. Martial, the sharp-tongued poet, once quipped about a tavern where even the bread seemed eager to kill you. You can almost hear the laughter and the groans of those who learned the hard way not to trust a suspicious stew. You edge closer to watch the vendor. He ladles stew into bowls with hands still greasy from chopping fish. Behind him, flies buzz around an uncovered jar of olives, landing and lifting in a constant dance. A boy shoos them lazily, but only half-heartedly. He knows they'll be back. Customers, meanwhile, barely notice. Hunger overrules hygiene. A worker tears into his bread, dips it into the stew, and eats without hesitation. The smells here are sharper. Old oil, sour wine, garlic that's gone past its prime. And yet, mingled together, they form a scent that's oddly comforting, almost hypnotic in its familiarity. You remind yourself, you've eaten questionable street food in your own life too, and somehow survived. Rome was no different, only louder and less sanitary. Historians still debate the true scale of health risks. Did Roman stomachs simply adapt, hardened by years of exposure, or were foodborne illnesses a quiet, constant plague on the city? The evidence is murky. Ancient skeletons show signs of parasites, malnutrition, and chronic disease, but was that from food stalls or from broader urban filth? The answers slip away like steam from the dolia. You notice a man coughing violently after sipping spoiled wine, yet he shrugs, laughs, and orders another cup. Beside him, a woman mutters about weak stomachs while tearing into fried chickpeas. Resilience or denial? Perhaps both. Still, you can't ignore the risk. The jars weren't refrigerated, the stalls often sat in sun all day, and water carried its own dangers. And yet, despite all this, the stalls thrived. The city ran on them, no matter how many stomachaches followed. You step away slowly, breathing fresher air as the street widens. The memory of rancid oil and buzzing flies lingers, but so does the strange comfort of knowing that even with risks, Romans kept returning to these counters. Hunger is stubborn, and appetite rarely listens to reason. The streets ahead feel thinner now, less crowded, less vibrant. You notice shutters drawn where stalls once glowed, counters dusty where ladles used to scrape. Something in the air has shifted, heavier, quieter. You realize you're walking into the decline, the slow unraveling of Rome's fast food culture as the empire itself faltered. A mainstream fact first. By the late empire, economic strain and political turmoil disrupted the food supply. Grain shipments from North Africa, once steady as clockwork, became unreliable. Inflation drove up prices, and entire neighborhoods that had once depended on thermopolia struggled to afford even the basics. Stalls still operated, but they were fewer, more desperate, and sometimes replaced by private kitchens as households retreated inward. You wander past a once busy Pompeii, its painted frescoes flaking, the counter cracked. A single vendor stirs a pot that barely steams. Customers shuffle by but don't stop. Maybe they have no coins. Maybe they don't trust the thin stew. The cook sighs, his spoon circling listlessly, as if even he knows the golden age of bustling counters has slipped away. Here's a quirky tidbit. Late Roman laws tried to control prices of food and drink, including tavern offerings. The Edict on Maximum Prices issued by Emperor Diocletian in 301 CE listed exact costs for wine, bread, and even a simple meal in a papina. But price fixing didn't solve shortages. Merchants ignored the law or sold secretly, while poorer citizens were left with little more than bread rations and watered wine. Imagine walking into a fast food place today with a government poster declaring the maximum cost of fries, then realizing no fries are actually available. You stroll further and see signs of adaptation. In some districts, thermopolia shift focus from bustling counters to quieter service, more like private kitchens feeding loyal locals. A family slips inside a small tavern, carrying their own bread, asking only for wine and soup to supplement it. The communal, noisy energy has dulled into something subdued. Historians still argue about when exactly Rome's food culture began to decline. Some claim the fall of Thermopolia mirrored the collapse of urban life itself in the 4th and 5th centuries. Others suggest the tradition never really vanished, but evolved into the taverns and inns of medieval Europe. Was it decline or transformation? You pause, watching a vendor close his shutters for the day, and decide the line is blurred, like so much of history. The smells here are weaker than before. Fewer spices, fewer sizzling meats. Mostly you catch the faint aroma of lentils, onions, and stale wine. The air feels thin, as if the feast that once fed an empire is slowly starving. A soldier walks past, armor dented, face weary. He eyes the closed stalls and mutters about the old days, when a hot skewer or bowl of stew was never more than a corner away. You feel the loss in his voice, a nostalgia as heavy as the sword at his side, and yet the echoes of life remain. Children still chase one another through alleys, their laughter ringing even above the silence of empty stalls. A vendor still wipes down his counter, determined to open tomorrow. The empire may falter, but hunger doesn't stop. You continue. Forward, the fading hum of Rome's fast food following like a ghost. It is quieter, yes, but still there, stubborn as bread crusts. And in that stubbornness, you glimpse the truth. Decline isn't disappearance. It's change, waiting for another age to pick up the ladle. You keep walking, though now the streets blur and time itself seems to soften around you. The stalls you pass shimmer like memories, half crumbling, half alive, until slowly, Rome's voices fade into the echoes of later centuries. You realize, you're not just watching decline, you're watching legacy. The way Rome's fast food stalls lingered long after the empire fell. A mainstream fact drifts in first. Medieval Europe inherited much from Rome, including its street food culture. Taverns and alehouses sprouted in towns, offering hot meals and cheap drink to travelers and locals alike. They weren't identical to Thermopolia, but the rhythm was the same. Simple counters, communal benches, steaming pots of stew, and mugs of wine passed quickly from hand to hand. Even when Rome was gone, its habit of feeding the busy and the poor endured. You pause to imagine a medieval street, smoke curling from a thatched tavern, a woman ladling barley soup into wooden bowls. The coins are different, the accents rougher, but the feeling is familiar. History bends, but it doesn't break. The need for fast, communal food is too deeply rooted in human life. Here's a quirky tidbit. In London as early as the 14th century, vendors sold hot pies on the street, often so hastily baked that complaints about undercooked meat filled court records. You grin at the thought. Even in the Middle Ages, people were filing the medieval version of one-star reviews for bad takeout. The echoes keep moving forward. In bustling Renaissance cities, food stalls lined squares and markets, selling fried fish, bread, and spiced wine to artists, merchants, and apprentices. The lineage is clear. The thermopolium lived on in new disguises, tucked into every age where hunger met hurry. Historians still argue whether today's fast food culture directly descends from Rome or whether it simply reflects the universal logic of urban living. Did McDonald's inherit its spirit from Pompeii, or is it just coincidence? You shrug inwardly, because standing here, watching history blur, the debate doesn't matter. The rhythm is too obvious to deny. You look around once more and see the modern world slipping in. Neon signs glowing faintly over marble counters. The buzz of electricity humming beside the clink of amphory. The ancient stalls fold into diners, taverns, coffee shops, burger joints, food trucks. The costumes change. The flavors shift, but the scene is timeless. Humans gathering where food is fast, cheap, and shared. And now the noise begins to fade. The sizzling oil, the clinking cups, the laughter and arguments, they soften, like a song lowering its volume. The air grows cooler, the streets quieter, and the bustle of Rome dissolves into a gentle hush. You're left with only the faint memory of warm bread, garlic in the air, and the comfort of knowing food was always waiting just around the corner. You exhale, the weight of centuries easing out with your breath. Rome's fast food stalls have carried you from the roar of empire to the quiet of your own room. And as the last images flicker away, you feel yourself growing heavier, sleepier, ready to let the story close. And so, for the final wind down the streets of Rome dim now, their fires extinguished, their voices dissolving into the stillness of night. Imagine the counters empty, the jars cool, the laughter gone quiet, leaving only the faint echo of sandals against stone. Even that sound softens, fading into the background like the hush of a fan in your own room. The smells, garlic, wine, bread, slip away too, leaving nothing but calm, clean air. Your breathing slows as you picture marble counters under moonlight, silent and serene. The stalls are no longer crowded, no longer noisy. They are resting, like the city itself, folded into sleep. You walk past them one last time, not hurried, not hungry, just drifting in the calm glow of their memory. The debates of historians, the noise of dice, the sting of garum, all of it quiets into distance. What remains is the comfort of rhythm, the assurance that in every age, humans have sought a warm meal, a brief rest, a shared laugh. That rhythm hums gently in your mind now, steady, predictable, soothing. You let the image grow hazy. The marble counters blur into soft white light, the jars into gentle shapes, the chatter into a murmur like waves. Soon even that dissolves, leaving you with nothing but the quiet comfort of knowing you've traveled far and safely returned. Breathe slowly. Let your eyelids grow heavy. The story has ended, but its warmth lingers, wrapping you like a blanket. You are safe, you are calm, and the world outside can wait until tomorrow. Sweet dreams.